Welcome back to Chess with Gert Janse van Rensburg, and today we are covering one of the kings of the chessboard, namely Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion. Wilhelm Steinitz was born in 1836 and died at the age of 64 in 1900. He was born in Prague and later a citizen of the United States. He was the first official world champion and crowned after defeating Johannes Zachertot in 1886. Steinitz held the title until 1894 and successfully defended it 3 times. Before Steinitz, chess was dominated by bold attacks and romantic sacrifices. Steinitz introduced a new way of thinking, one built on careful planning, small positional advantages, and scientific principles. His ideas were controversial at the time, but they eventually reshaped how the game is played. Steinitz was a dominant force for nearly 3 decades, from his 1866 match over Adolf Anderssen to his last championship match in 1896. He won nearly every serious contest he played. He was not just a player, but a theorist, whose legacy continues to define the strategic core of modern chess. Emanuel Lasker, who succeeded him as champion, captured Steinitz's philosophy. In the beginning of the game, ignore the search for combinations. Abstain from violent moves. Aim for small advantages, accumulate them, and only after having attained these ends, search for the combination. And in the words of Bobby Fischer, he understood more about the use of squares than did morphing, and contributed a great deal more to chess theory. Steinitz changed chess forever. Not just how it's played, but how it's understood. The game we are covering today is called the Royal Stroll. The game comes from the Baden-Baden tournament of 1870 held in Germany. 33-year-old Steinitz are playing with the white pieces. His opponent with the black pieces is 37-year-old Louis Paulsen. He was a leading figure in the mid-19th century chess. Paulsen was a defensive pioneer and visionary opening theoretician. Ranked amongst the world's top players in the 1860s to 70s, he defeated or drew Anderssen in 3 matches and introduced foundational ideas to the Sicilian, Vienna, 4 knights, and early Pirk, or Piet. Though he published no books, his analytical contribution shaped modern chess openings more than most of his contemporaries. So, the game opened with e4. Known as the King's Pawn game, it's claiming control over the center, opening up development for both the queen and bishop. And Bobby Fischer, the 11th world champion, famously said it's best by test. Black responds with e5, controlling the center and developing symmetrically. Steinitz continued with knight c3, known as the Vienna game, developing a piece while increasing control in the center, but without tempo, giving black more freedom on how to develop. Black continued with knight c6, known as the Max Lang defense. Black decides to develop symmetrically and increase their own control in the center. Note, they cannot develop with a threat in this position. For example, knight f6 in this position does not actually threaten e4, and there is no other real threat. It also leaves the queen's visit to the h4 to e1 diagonal open if white decides to play f4, leading to the Vienna gambit. Indeed, white does continue with f4, attacking black's central pawn, e5, and taking space on the king's side, but not developing a piece and weakening said diagonal h4 to e1. Black takes on f4, taking the offered pawn, going up in material and threatening to play queen h4, taking away white's right to castle. The downside is that black has lessened their own presence in the center, or the pawn could help control d4. d4, an ambitious move, claiming that gaining full central control gives enough compensation for the loss of white's right to castle after queen h4 check. It remains to be seen if black will be able to keep the material advantage though. Queen h4 check comes in and king e2. Black continued with d6. Just to bear in mind that if g3 is played, f takes g3 doesn't help white at all, as the queen can always just retreat and say I'm up a pawn with compensation. In fact, after g3, f takes g3, knight f3, black could play g2 check. Knight takes on h4 and g takes h1, queen, and you're up more material. So back to the game. d6, opening up the light squared bishop for development with the idea to meet knight f3 with bishop g4 and having the option of castling queenside early, after which black can then try to rip open the center, with white's king still in the center and therefore not safe. However, I do dislike the idea of defending the queen with a pin, as that makes the likelihood of needing to trade off the bishop higher as a result. Better would have been actually b6, with the idea of developing the light squared bishop to a6 with check. And white would not be able to develop in the way which they wish to. They would either have to play queen d2, giving an escape square for the king on d1, queen d3, stopping bishop h6, or knight b5, threatening a fall. So, after queen d2, black can then continue with g5, holding on to the pawn, and queen d3, black can then just play bishop b7, and after knight b5, black can then play bishop a6, pinning the king, the knight to the king, after which white should play a4. For context, if black, or rather white, continues with knight f3, which is a blunder, bishop a6 check forces the king to go to d2, followed by queen d2 check. And after, for example, bishop e2, black can continue putting pressure on the king that is in the center. So the better move would be knight d2, stopping the pin with a possible c3, but again knight f6, attacking the center again. And this position is worse. Like, yes, clearly worse for white. And that is why b6 would have been better. Also, d6 blocks in the vision of the dark split bishop. But back to the game. So after d6, knight f3 is played, with bishop g4 pinning the knight to the king. Bishop takes on f4, gaining back the pawn, while also developing a piece at the same time. At this point, white has a latent development, 3 minor pieces to black's 2 minor pieces, in addition to having the full center. But as a negative, the king is currently stuck in the center, and therefore it could be weak. Black castles queenside, and king e3. Although this move may look odd at first glance, it unpins the knight on f3 and renews the threat of knight takes queen on h4, gaining a tempo and allowing the development of the light squared bishop. Queen h5, moving the queen out of danger and aiming to move to the queen side. However, I believe this move is a mistake, or rather I believe that in my original analysis. But queen h5 is playable, but Paulsen did play it with my original analysis in mind. Therefore, the idea was flawed. A better idea could have been just to trade off the bishop for the knight. Yes, the queen can then take and the queen gets developed, but it would have been preferable to what black did. After the trade, for example, on f3, black should have continued with g6, bishop to either g7, or even maybe h6, just trying to get more pieces into play. White continues with bishop e2. Now all the minor pieces are developed, allowing white to actually now start a proper queenside pawn storm. Queen a5, following through with the original plan, but in doing so, making white's queenside assault even stronger. Better would have been the quite interesting g5. It is a sacrifice of a pawn in the name of catching up in development, and taking the pawn with the bishop is actually a blunder, because after bishop takes on f3, bishop takes on f3, or pawn takes on f3, queen takes on g5, is black with a piece up in exchange for a pawn. So the only logical moves are either dropping back the bishop to g3 or taking the pawn with the knight, allowing black to develop the piece in the progress. In the case of bishop g3, bishop g7 gets developed, aiming at the center, or in the case of knight takes on g5, knight f6 gets developed, defending the bishop on g4 while also developing a piece. But back to the game of queen a5. White continues with a3, preparing to play b5, launching the queenside pawn storm with tempo. Bishop takes on f3, an attempt to trade pieces as black is significantly lacking in development and space. With a small trap in mind, if white were to play b4 instead of recapturing, black doesn't have to move the queen immediately, but can play the intermezzo move bishop takes on d2, leaving black, in the end of it all, a piece up. So, back to the game where the best move being played is capturing with the king, keeping the light square bishop on the f1 to a6 diagonal where it participates in the attack. Queen h5 check is played, getting the queen out of the danger from b4, but having to move again. Better would have been simply developing knight f6, although I should mind queen h5 is a good move. But knight f6 is also a move that I believe is reasonable in the position. I'll just make sure. Yes, it is. So queen h5 tick. King e3. And queen h4. Preparing to play c5. That is what Paulsen is thinking in this position. Seeking counterplay, but at this point white is clearly better. g5 also walks straight into bishop g3, making the black queen move yet again. b4. The logical and thematic move from the position. But neither I or Steinitz saw that black had a move that could make life difficult in the long run for white. And that is why g3 should actually be played in this position. That move is f5. Unfortunately, Paulsen did not see it either. Whereas g5 can be easily parried with bishop g3, chasing the queen. But f5, well, it creates a lot of complications and headaches for white. For example, if white continued with b5, after knight c to e7, let's say you play a4, g5 traps a bishop. And if you in this position play g3 instead, the queen just drops back and the same threat still exists. And the immediate bishop g3 allows queen h6 check. So what would have to be played after f5 is still g3, but black is now back in the game after queen e7, and the game will continue. Example b5, knight a5, with the idea of just moving the knight out of the way, but with possible ideas of perhaps re-entering with c5 and also stopping the a-pawn from moving too far forwards, b6 and so forth. But back to the game with g5. Bishop g3, queen h6, and b5. At first glance, this just seems to move the knight out of danger, but this move is also preparing f5, and the move I'm talking about is knight c to e7. So, in response, white plays rook f1, stopping the f5 plan, and white is actually going to castle by hand, getting the king out of the center. And now the main weakness, if you will, for white is gone, and black doesn't have a kingside pawn storm going. They don't have all their pieces developed, but white is already in the process of a pawn storm with all their pieces developed. Knight f6 is played, king f2, knight c6, and king g1. The white king is now safe. Black attempts to launch a kingside attack, but wasting so many moves while also not being fully developed means that black is unfortunately too slow. But understandable why, Paulsen didn't play it, as the position is already hard to play. Queen g7, what's played. The ensign here actually prefers knight f4 for this move and every move until move 20. Because even though black is still worse, it gives black some counterplay. So, for example, what's been played here was bishop, knight f4, f3, rook g8, and bishop takes on f4. And to prove a point, after queen d7, queen d2, the move again the ensign prefers is knight f4, yet again attempting to create counterplay. And this just basically drops a pawn once more, but white could also continue with a4 if they so wish. But on the note of queen d2 itself, it is improving the queen's position with tempo, hitting the pawn on g5 and connecting the rooks. h6 was played, which is logical, protecting the pawn, and also the reason why it's hard to play knight f4 is when you look at the move, you see the trading of a piece, one of your only active pieces being traded, you're losing a pawn, doesn't look great. But at some point you have to go and say, I have to create counterplay. There is a trend in the position and I need to do everything I can to change the trend. After a4 is played, the black pieces played rook g8, and yet again knight f4 is the choice, with in fact completely ignoring even the knight is fine here. You can take the knight, but best move is just to play either a5 or b6. But that should be the last of me using the ensign to explain the knight moves. So b6 is played. White has arrived with ill intent for the black king. A takes b6, and now follows a very beautiful move. Rook takes on f6. Boom. It removes the defender of g4, and this is officially the end of the game. I'll show you why, and the game also, develops and shows you why. So after queen takes f6, bishop g4 is played, and you could maybe wonder why not play rook d2, just giving the piece back if the sacrifice works. Well, the problem is neither rook d7 or the game move, king b8, actually helps at all. Because to both responses, knight e5 is played, and then a5, leading either to material gain at worst or checkmate in most cases. So, for example, after queen d8, there's a variety of lines after a5. B takes on a5 as a line, and queen takes a5, and as you can see, checkmate is on the horizon. If instead of b takes a5 is played, b5 is played, you continue with a6. Because if you take, again, rook takes, c6 could be played, which is fine because rook a8 check, king b7, and rook just takes queen. And if the rook takes, we have queen a5 hitting rook. Let's say the rook moves, queen c7 check forces checkmate. And of course, if the king can't actually protect the rook. And just taking the knight again drops a rook. If instead in this position, c takes d5 is played, it's just rook takes d7. So b takes on a6 after b6 is not possible. So what about a b6? Well, now we have an unstoppable promotion on a8. The queen, the king will go here, and we just have bishop takes rook. The queen can't take because it has to stop promotion. Then there is a few more possible variations here. With after a5, instead we have king b8. And yet again, now it changes up. A takes on b6. C takes on b6 is just met with bishop takes on d7, queen takes d7, and knight f6, forking the queen and rook, and going up in material. If instead c6 is played to kick the knight, we have this very beautiful rook a1 check sacrifice. King takes on a1 is followed by queen a5 check, king b8, queen a7 check, king c8, followed by queen a8 checkmate. And then the very last move to actually look at, because is f5, and nothing really changes, just bishop takes f5. But what if instead in this position queen g7 is played, keeping up open this way? Again a5. With king b8, first off, we can just take the rook if we really want to, and we'll be up material. But we can go for more with a takes b6. C takes b6, because if we, for example, play rook d8, again rook a8 check leads to checkmate with this variation of queen a7 checkmate, because the bishop now covers c8. And if c takes is played, then it's just bishop takes. And if b takes on a5 is played, keeping the pin, we have queen takes on a5 yet again with the same checkmate threats. And also there's a new threat of queen c7 checkmate as well. And after king d8, trying to get away from the queen side problems, we still have a takes b6. f5 could be played here, but bishop takes f5 is fine. We still keep problems open for, for black. But if I don't play f5 and just play, for example, knight e7, because we're threatening rook a8 checkmate, we have b takes c7. If rook takes, we have simply, just let me make sure, I think I've got this, yeah. We've got in this position b takes c7, which leads to a very similar checkmate with rook a8 check, knight blocks, rook takes c8, rook takes c8, and queen a5 check, and checkmate is incoming. This is a checkmate in 4 position. But what if we try and block this check instead with king e8? Now this is a beautiful finish with rook a8 check, rook d8, rook takes on d8 check, king d8, and b takes c7 check, and the king will have to move back to 8, followed by c8, queen promotion checkmate. So back to the game where king b8 was played. And knight e5 is yet again played, queen g7 is played, a5. Black played f5 here, 8 takes b6, because there's no need to take the pawn here, as I need to show you what happens if the pawn is taken. If the pawn is taken, we have yet again this rook checkmate idea that I said previously, and if the bishop is taken instead, it is still the very same checkmate motif, where yeah, this is played. So king b8, b takes e7, and the queen can then take, but queen takes e7, and as you can see, it's just the materials going up, because we'll at minimum be able to win this rook, and checkmate is still in the air. So I digress. Back to the game. A takes b6, c takes b6, and simply knight takes b7. And now black plays e7 yet again, not being able to take either pawn or piece because they need to stop rook a8. An example would be if f takes on g4, we have rook a8 check, king c7 followed by queen c3 check, king takes b6, queen a5 check, king c6, and d5 checkmate. The other line is pawn takes on g4, instead taking the bishop, rook a8 check, king c7, queen c3 check, king b6, queen a5, king c6, d5, d7, and queen takes d8 checkmate. So that's why the knight has to come in to be able to move to c6, blocking the check. E takes f5 is played, queen f7, and f6. The computer shows a missed checkmate that Steinitz and I, while analyzing this game, did not see. So after a rook, so what Steinitz could have played was rook a8 check, king c7, queen a5, and very simply put, if rook takes a8, it's simply bishop takes d6, and black is being checkmated in either one or two moves, no matter what they do. If they go king d8, queen takes on a8 check, knight c8, followed by queen takes c8 checkmate. If they take the bishop, it's simply queen c5 checkmate, and if they go to c6, it's the same checkmate. So what they will have to play, according to best play here, is the very simplistic knight c6. After knight c6, knight e5 is played. The queen cannot take because it's a discovered attack and it's double check. King d7 followed by queen c7 check, not queen takes on d8 because the knight covers it. King e8 and the quite spectacular bishop h5, pinning the queen to the king. For example, if the rook were to take on a8, we have knight f6 checkmate. And the very same thing would happen if queen takes on h5. So, rook g6 is the only move to extend the checkmate sequence. Now the move is rook takes d8, knight takes d8, and then bishop takes g6, followed by, you can play any move here as black, but for the sake of making the moves as long as possible, it's queen takes c6, f takes c6, and you can play either knight e6 here, knight c6, bishop b7, bishop d7. It's checkmate in one and all those cases. In the cases of bishop g7, it's simply queen to d7 checkmate, and the same with bishop to d7. And any knight move leads to knight f6 checkmate. So, back to the game where f6 was played. However, note that this is still completely and utterly winning for white. Knight c6 was played. Why knight c6 is played and queen takes f6 is not played is because after queen takes f6 there's some beautiful checkmates. Because after queen a5 you have the knight c6 move yet again, but queen a8 check, king c7, and we have knight d5 checkmate. And if the king tries to run away, we have knight a5 double check, king c6, because if they go to b8, it's simply queen c7 checkmate. If they go to c6, it is queen b6 check. After d5, we play knight c7 check. If they go to e4, it's simply rook e1 checkmate. But the very beautiful checkmate here is if they go c4, we play white plays bishop e2 check, dragging the king closer to the first rank of white. Bishop e1 check, king takes on c1, followed by queen b1 checkmate. Quite beautiful. I don't think it's necessarily the fastest checkmates, but those were beautiful to me. So knight c6 was played, c4. And this is important. First off, it opens up the rank for the queen, the a2 square for the queen. It is important for the following moves, as well as defending the d5 square, supporting the knight. So, knight a7 is played, queen a2, knight b5, trying to get rid of the square, protected square, but Steinitz continues with in this position knight e5, because that's the whole point. We want to take away the escape square. But if, for example, knight c6 was played, we have here again, yes, knight e5, and if king c7 immediately, it is queen a5. The king can run back after c6. It's just let me just make sure, d5, and it doesn't matter what you do. If queen takes, it's just pawn takes checkmate. The king can't move, so it's just over. After king b8, it's queen takes a7 check, king c7, knight d5 check. Queen has to give herself up, and the checkmate is still not stopped, in fact. So, back to queen a2, knight b5, knight d5, and the queen again gives herself up. C takes d5, knight takes d4, queen a7 check, king c7, rook c1, knight c6, and all the most amount of respect to Louis Paulsen for allowing this checkmate on the board, as the beautiful rook takes c6 checkmate is the last move of the game. So, my thoughts on the game. This was a beautiful and well-played effort by Steinitz and a disappointing performance from Paulsen. Still, there's much to learn here. We saw the power of central control and the importance of rapid development. Black's early queen sortie and neglect of piece development left him vulnerable, while White's better coordination and space advantage steadily built impressive. Even though white's king stayed in the center, it was never in danger, a testament to how safety lies in activity and control. This game illustrates just how punishing it can be to ignore foundational opening principles. And just to, go to a point in the game where I feel like what I just mentioned is um, showcased. All of white's pieces are active, developed, all of them are central. The knight can at any point go to the central square, where later on it played a role. The bishops are either in the center or looking at the center. Whereas black, his only piece is this knight, which is very passive. It doesn't have a lot of forward moves. It can only go to c6, which even there doesn't have a lot of moves. And this was move 15. The screen, which is the only other developed piece, if you will, by black, this also is very passive on h6. You could maybe perhaps say in this position, oh, but g4 is an idea. No, it's not. Bishop f4 just attacks a queen. The queen will have to move yet again. So overall, black's position, you can go through the whole game. Black's rook is not on an open file. It's not active. It's doing nothing. Whereas white is just increasingly activating pieces, increasing the activity, control, developing more. And in this position, for example, he's just bringing his king to safety. Finally, a second piece activates, but it is still, unfortunately, a little too late at this point. And the result of the game is showcased in how it finished. All the pieces were in play. The queen was in play after queen d2. The king was safe. And only after everything was fully done did Steinitz continue with his attack. Because b5 here was not just played with the intent of, oh, I'm attacking this queen side. This is a very important thing to mention. This knight has to move. It's not just about attacking on the queen side. It is about making this knight, which is the only active developed minor piece, passive. It either has to go to a5, where it's completely out of play on the edge of the board, or back to b8, undeveloping, and yes, maybe it can try and develop back into play, but it's not active anymore. And the only other sensible move is 97, where it is yet again passive. If you look at white's position, 3 of their minor pieces are on the second rank or above, whereas in black's case, only one of their minor pieces are on the second rank and above. I'm not counting the queen, as it's not a minor piece, and not that far later, we see, even in the context of counting queens, we are still a piece ahead in activity. And neither of these knights are looking great. This bishop didn't actually move the entire game. Yes, this bishop never moved. So, unfortunately, that is why well, not unfortunately, but that is why principles are important. All the opening principles are of utmost importance, and it can be seen in this game. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and may Wilhelm Steinitz rest in peace. Have a good one, everybody, and Play chess for fun and have fun.